Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, brought to you by the World Puja Network. And I'm joined today with Linda Willitts, who's been an assistant and co-worker with CSETI and the Disclosure Project for 11 or 12 years now, and has done so much work to help us create the projects to let the world know that we're not alone in the universe, and also to travel all over the world and make contact with these visitors within the framework of peaceful contact and universal consciousness. So today we're going to focus on some of the ongoing contact events that the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which you can see more about at CSETI.org, CSETI.org, and specifically some of the exciting events that have happened in the past few years at Mount Shasta in California, where we will be holding a retreat to make contact with these visitors, and it's open to the public for people who want to join us there from August 31st until September 6th. And so I think that's one of the things we'll focus on today, and all the really dramatic and exciting contact events that have occurred there. So welcome, Linda, and thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you. I love to talk about this subject.
Well, I think that to start out, I'd like to introduce sort of what we do on these expeditions. Many people wonder what it's really like to go out under the stars till 1 or 2 in the morning with a group of people to do this. And the protocols are in the CDs and in the books and training materials that you can find at disclosureproject.org and also CSETI.org. But the key to it is the understanding of the state of higher consciousness that becomes non-local, so that you can remote view the extraterrestrial civilizations, make contact with them, and also being established in a state of peace and a state of higher awareness while the contact is occurring. This is very important. We've had some amazing close encounters, and if you're not in that state of consciousness, most people would be just too, in a sense, excited or uncentered to be able to have an intelligent contact take place. So it's very important to understand the power, as Krishna was told Arjuna on the battlefield, that a little of this, referring to pure consciousness, eliminates all fear and allows the mind and the person to be completely centered in this state of universal peace and consciousness. So we use a number of protocols, and during the daytime when we're on these expeditions, we discuss these issues and go through a training program together where I teach everyone the meditation techniques using both the mantra techniques and the remote viewing techniques we developed, which are based on the ancient Vedic tradition of becoming a true seer with the inner sight opened. And then, of course, we break for dinner, and then we go out to this wonderful contact site we have there in the Mount Shasta area, where so much has happened over the years. And we are out under the stars usually for 4 to 6 hours. And during that time, we do the meditation and remote viewing of deep space and contact with these visitors. And then we vector them into that area of Mount Shasta. And we also have high-powered lasers and beeping tones, electronic tones, that have been recorded that are of extraterrestrial origin that we send back out into space electromagnetically so that they get a very precise fix on where we're located. And so we use both consciousness and thought as well as lasers and these electronic tones to create a vector that invites these visitors to come very close within this context and within the philosophy of universal peace. So we invite all visitors to come to that location, a sort of gathering of interstellar peoples, because we know that this is the time for the opening of the chapter on Earth of universal peace. And in that context, when the group becomes very resonant and you begin to have a critical mass of the group, let's say there are 30 or 40 people, achieve that state of consciousness and calmness, what we find is that instantly these ET craft or beings will appear all around us or in the sky above us or coming from the volcano itself, the Mount Shasta volcano, which is a dormant volcano, but which is actually one that could actually erupt. And so we prepare people for this sort of contact because almost every time we have been out there in that area, we have had some amazing contact experiences that have happened with these extraterrestrial visitors.
There's not a single time that we've been out there that amazing things haven't happened, and it's like, we think we've seen so many things, and then they think of something new to do every time we go. It's just incredible.
Right, and it's actually very beautiful. I'm reminded that a couple years ago we were there, and towards the end of the night we were making a circle, and we were doing this sort of blessing for the group and this universal consciousness, and it was this crystal clear night, and we had Venus in the east and Mars in the west, and we had a male and a female planet up in the sky sort of holding the balance. And in this instant there were two extraterrestrial craft that emerged from the east, going right beside each other, and flew right overhead where you could almost hear them, and covered from one horizon to the other, connecting Venus with Mars in just a few seconds. And it was this breathtaking send-off saying goodbye to us that night that happened, that everyone saw, and that it was just so beautiful and so amazing. And that's just one of thousands of events like that have happened there. And when I say thousands, I mean literally so many things over the years. We've been going there since when? I guess 1999.
1999, the first time we ever went there. So and in fact, remember, we did a workshop in June of '99 to kind of, make sure that we had people that would be interested in doing a training later in September. And the very first time you and I entered that town and we went and had lunch, as we walked out of the restaurant, we were buzzed by a black helicopter.
That's correct.
We were surveilled from the first moment we stepped into town.
I think this is a really important point that Linda just made, is that because of the high-profile nature that we're doing, I mean, obviously, I have done briefings for CIA directors, for heads of state, for members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. We're now working very closely with a G7 country, with their Ministry of Defense and the head of state of that country, to set up a protocol to have a landing of these extraterrestrial visitors occur, so that the head of state of that country can make open and friendly contact with these visitors and then announce this to the world. This is actively being negotiated even as we speak. And yet, what we find is that because we're doing this under no official cover, no official support, that the classified projects that are very opposed to making peaceful contact and who would like to see the world eventually have some kind of interplanetary conflict, which is why there's so much disinformation and scary information out there about ETs, which is, by the way, completely false, is very upset when we do this. And we've had a number of things happen, and what you just mentioned reminds me that first year we were there, we had, I believe it was 3 out of the 5 nights we were out under the stars, we had this amazing contact happen with this huge interstellar craft that was so large that it was seen from Vancouver all the way down to L.A.
Right.
I don't know if you want to share people how that happened.
It was our very first time we had ever, spent a week at Mount Shasta, and it happened one of the first few nights for the first time, and it was the first time that you had ever done the prayer inviting the ETs and the Celestials to join us in the healing of the earth. And,
right.
And it was exactly at that time, we were all in meditation, and when you spoke that part, Al, a member of our group, got the telepathic message to look up, and he broke the meditation to say, look up and there was just majestically moving across the sky. And I mean, it lasted a good 2 minutes because it covered the whole sky, and it was a triangular formation of three bright points, but you could see sort of a distorted image of the stars in the sky as this huge craft moved across, and it was out of our atmosphere. So it was one of those times that so often we see craft that are within our atmosphere, and immediately military jets or helicopters come in. But this didn't, they didn't bother with this because it was so far out of our atmosphere, but it was so huge that some people couldn't see it right away.
Right, they were looking for some specific small object, and it was such a large area. It was almost as large as the triangle in Pegasus,
right,
moving across the sky. And then it turned and tilted and went upwards further into space away from the Earth. And as it was beginning to recede over into that area of the star fields, I took the laser and signaled to it goodbye, and it flashed a brilliant light back at us saying goodbye to us.
Right.
And it did this. It came back 3 nights at Mount Shasta, and we estimate that this craft, which was a single craft, because when it turned you could see it was a single object, was lit at 3 points, but it was not totally materialized. So between the points of light, you would see the stars in the background beyond it, sort of like a heat wave or fuzziness where it would distort it. And we estimate that it had to be several hundred to several thousand miles in diameter. Now, people think we're making this up, but because of the fact that it was that large in the sky and was visible from Vancouver all the way down to L.A., and that it was specifically signaling and vectoring with our group, and it was locked on to our group, there's no question that it had to be one of these massive, I believe it was a big interstellar center where all the civilizations that have attained peace and that are able to travel through the crossing point of light, beyond the speed of light, through the other dimensions, that this is where they gather, this is where they meet. And I believe it's a big double-ended tetrahedral-shaped ship, and we were seeing the 3 points of the edge of this ship, city, whatever you want to call it, because it was so enormous. And we actually have this videotaped. We're going to put some of these images. We're going to have a new book come out this fall called Contact that will be all the CSETI experiences over the last 15 years or so. And we're going to have a CD with that will show some of these images because it is so astonishing. And, of course, when this happened, it happened at exactly the point in the meditation and prayer where we were gathering in consciousness all of our group, all the higher celestial beings, and these extraterrestrial planetary civilizations focusing on the Earth for its healing and enlightenment and this golden light streaming to the Earth in consciousness. And as we reach that point of perfect harmony and that point in the meditation and prayer, this massive interstellar center appeared in the sky and floated over and turned and then signaled to us as it was leaving, and then came back 2 more nights while we were there. I mean, this is just one of just dozens and dozens and dozens of events that have happened at Mount Shasta, and that's why we go back there. That's why we're going to be there again in August and September. I think August 31st to September 6th.
Right.
And because it's such a special place. In fact, I believe that these events over the last 10 years or so that we've been doing has gotten a lot of attention from some other parties, because we just found out that the SETI project is putting 300 and some radio telescopes in a valley near Mount Shasta to look for signals from the ETs. And it's sort of strange that they picked that area. You wonder why. Of course, the reason they give is they say it's dark, but there are a lot of dark places in the United States, and it's interesting that they're putting them right there. So I think that this is such an important area, and that Mount Shasta has an amazing energy and spiritual energy. And we have found that all over the world where there's a lot of volcanic openings from the Earth's core to the surface, that and where there's a potential for a lot of earth changes and geophysical instability, there are a lot of ET craft that are there. And we have found that that's true in Mexico at Mount Popo. It's been true in other areas of the world, in Mount Unzen in Japan, and of course we see this in the Cascade Range and in the area around Mount Shasta. Of course, the original, quote, flying saucers that were reported by Arnold back in 1947, in June of that year, were there in the Cascade Range near Mount Hood. So we know that this is an area where there's been an enormous amount of ET activity over the last 60 years, and that's why we go there, and we have just had the most amazing experiences. But part of what happened that week was that after this event happened, we were planning to have a talk in the little town of Mount Shasta, which has maybe about 4,000 people, and we had been invited to do a talk, and so we were going to do it that evening before we went out. Well, it turned out that the area got inundated with these, and people think this is a joke, these unmarked dark helicopters that had all these electronic weaponry loaded on them. And as these helicopters came into town, I remember you and I and some other friends were at a restaurant having dinner.
Right.
Everyone got crazy, and anyone who was mentally unstable came unglued. It was like a psychotronic burst that happened in the city of Mount Shasta, and there was all this turmoil in the streets and things being thrown in the streets, and there were people saying they were going to bring a gun to the lecture and kill me and shoot me, and bizarre stuff.
And there were actually military guys in camo outfits, around town that night. Yes,
and everyone saw this, and people were going, what is going on? And we know that what had happened is that our deep space network, which is run out of NORAD and out of our intelligence community, had picked up on this massive, enormous interstellar center that came in and was signaling and interacting with us on Mount Shasta. And so they sent these weapon systems and personnel in to try to suppress any further activity from happening. And to make a very long story short, we ended up doing the lecture successfully and then leaving to go back out, and we in fact continue to have this enormous craft appear 2 more evenings that we were there. But what we see in many of these cases, and this is something that a lot of people are astonished when they come on these expeditions, is that obviously what we're doing is being observed by folks who would rather us not, humans who would rather us not make peaceful contact, because we're going outside of their control system. We're saying, look, it's enough of this stupidity, enough of the militarization of the relationship, enough of the fear-mongering, enough of the disinformation. Let's go out there as citizen diplomats and make contact and see what happens. And that's what we're doing. We have become interplanetary citizen diplomats, and that's what we're training other people to do, so that whether you live in California or Wyoming or in Japan or anywhere all over the world, we're training people to become citizen diplomats, to make peaceful, open contact in a state of pure consciousness with these visitors. And we are never disappointed so long as people approach it free of fear, free of prejudice, open-mindedly, and in that state of consciousness. And yet we see that there are these other elements that are the classified projects that deal with the ET issue that are very upset that we're doing it. And so often they will send in jets or helicopters or personnel to try to suppress the event or the contact from progressing too far. And we're never afraid of this, by the way. No one's ever been harmed by it. But we know that they're doing it because they don't want us to take it too far, because they don't want the cat to get out of the bag, and they're very worried that we're being so successful. I can tell you, you don't send in these sort of jets and helicopters and all this kind of stuff unless you really think the group is making the contact for real. And it's interesting because over the years, even though we've been ridiculed a lot in the public for having done this, the governments of other countries, as well as our own government, there's a reason that primarily I was brought in to brief President Clinton's first CIA director, is that the head of Army Intelligence and a number of other people knew we had actually succeeded in figuring out the sort of cosmic Rosetta Stone of how to make contact and communicate with these extraterrestrial civilizations. And that's why they began to be very interested in what we were discovering. But at the same time, there's a rogue classified project that isn't controlled by the Congress or anyone else that is trying to suppress it. So you have both dynamics going on simultaneously. You have three dynamics. You have the legitimate governments of the world trying to find out what's really happening because they don't really control this issue. You have the rogue government trying to suppress what we're doing. And you have the ETs cooperating with us to the extent that it's safe and appropriate for whatever given setting and time to make open contact. And you have all that going on all at the same time when we're out under the stars with 30 or 40 people. It's really quite an interesting and exciting dynamic.
It's incredible, and the ETs, they're right there with us very often. The instant we get on site and people are just arriving, we're starting to set up our chairs in the circle in the field, something will happen right then and there, like at Mount Shasta at our secluded site that time that the white ball of light appeared, and it wasn't even dark yet. And
that's right in the field.
Yeah, right where Trudy and you and I and Debbie and Jan and all were setting up our chairs.
That's correct. And, often that will happen as soon as we arrive on the site because we have remote viewed the extraterrestrial peoples and told them where we're going to be and when we're going to be there before we go. And so often they'll have some kind of presence there already. Sometimes a craft will just fly over as soon as we get there. Sometimes we'll have a luminous orb of light that'll float through the group. Sometimes we'll have a strange electromagnetic effect, like we'll have magnetometers or radar detectors, and we'll be way out in the wilderness, and they will go off anomalously or in some kind of code as we're setting up. Sometimes we'll have some other kind of phenomenon or expression of extraterrestrial intelligence happen around us that is very, very clear where they're saying, okay, we know you're here. We got it. And so I think that one of the things that we find with this is that as the week goes on, and you imagine doing this for a whole week out under the stars with a group of people in this state of higher consciousness and practicing these protocols, is that it builds and it builds and it builds. And we just are always so excited about what happens. Not only in Mount Shasta, of course, we've had similar things happen at Joshua Tree National Park up in the high desert of California where we're going to be in November. And also we're going to do the same project here in the Blue Ridge Mountains here outside Charlottesville, Virginia, on our farmland here. And it was there a couple years ago that we had a videotape going under certain conditions. It's called Super Night Shot. It's an infrared system that the Sony cameras have. And I had seen this craft way up above us, a little bit to our north and east. And I was pointing to it, and then I saw this very high energy probe come out of space towards us, and I pointed to it and pointed to it going straight into the center of our circle, because we always form a sitting circle out on our meadow. And this was here in Charlottesville, Virginia. And again, we're going to be doing the same training and expedition here in October of this year. Well, what happened was that the man who had this camera running looked at the frames later, and he actually captured this probe on this infrared energy, and it was following my finger coming down and to the center of the circle. And what it was an interdimensional communication device, and it had rounded aspects of it and pointed aspects of it in sort of a Fibonacci code sequence that was a communication, and the rounded ones were for receiving, and the pointed ones were for transmitting. And it was a type of technological electromagnetic device that interfaces with thought and consciousness. But because of the type of camera he was using that was shooting in this infrared spectrum, he was able to capture it, and also several other objects like that around us on that same expedition here in Virginia.
And these things happen so quickly that unless you have a camera already running, you wouldn't be fast enough to catch it. And so he had his camera already running, and that was, we have some incredible photos. Yeah,
the whole time lapse of this, by the way, was 1/58th of a second. So think about that, 1,001. That's a second, 1/58th of that. And yet I could sense it with consciousness, but also see it with my eyes. But it was very fast. But luckily, he was able to capture it, and then he was able to freeze each of those frames and got a number of these frames where you could see it in great detail. And with the circle sitting there and with me pointing to it. So I think that what people come to realize is that everyone thinks that extraterrestrial civilizations are going to be using a Steven Spielberg movie set to sort of appear around us. And what we have found over the last 18 years of doing this all over the world is that, yes, sometimes they are completely materialized like you see in a movie, and we certainly have had that happen, but often we'll have this other type of energy field around us where the extraterrestrial spacecraft and the beings are in sort of a plasma form or some kind of other energetic form, because obviously when they're traveling through interstellar space at multiples of the speed of light, because you can't go slower than the speed of light and make any kind of travel any distance in even our own galaxy, that they're in an energy form that's very close to what the mystics used to call astral or etheric energy. And welcome back to the World Puja Network. This is Dr. Stephen Greer with Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, and I have Linda Willitts here on the phone, and we're discussing our expeditions to Mount Shasta and other areas around the world where we've had such wonderful contact with these extraterrestrial visitors through the CSETI project, which you can learn more about at CSETI.org. Welcome back, Linda.
Thank you. You know, we were talking about the man that had his camcorder running and filmed this incredible light object that came down in our Virginia training a couple of years ago, and that reminded me of the time in Mount Shasta. It was 2005 when we were doing a meditation, and I had my tape recorder on because I was taping the meditation, and that anomalous sound occurred behind us.
That's correct. And, of course, at Mount Shasta, we had a tone that we have now recently had analyzed by an audio expert, Charlie Baylog, who's on our team. While we were at Mount Shasta one year, we had this tone that came into our circle, right where we were all sitting while we were doing this meditation. And everyone could see the form of the tone. It's very hard. It sounds very abstract, but everyone saw the shape of a craft that was like a string of pearls, and the tone was so multidimensional and omnidirectional that it created a form. It is very Vedic in the sense of how sounds can manifest form. In this sense, it was such a pure sound, and it was so multidimensional. And everyone heard it with their physical ears. This was not sort of something that was, a remote view or a vision or anything like that. It was absolutely heard.
Right.
And we recorded it. Your recorder got a little snippet of it.
Right.
And we have since cleaned this up with the help of Charlie Baylog, and we now have that on the CSETI.org site. And it was very clearly an extraterrestrial interdimensional tone that had with it the form and the shape of the object with the tone that was there in the circle with us. It actually was there superimposed on space-time with us.
And it was cooperating with us as well, because you had just begun the meditation and you were speaking maybe a minute into it, and you paused for a little longer than a normal pause, and that, in that total silent gap, is when the sound occurred.
That's correct.
So it wasn't coincidental. It was cooperating with us. And that is a quality of ET sound that we've experienced other places as well. As ET sound, you can see the form of the sound. And I was one of the people that, several of us did see it as a string of large pearls, dark. My pearls were gray. Most people did see darker pearls.
Right, and some saw actually colors and different things, but everyone got an image with a form with this sound, which brings us back to the whole interesting aspect of sound in the form of these mantras, a manifesting form, and that in the Vedic tradition, in the ancient Himalayan Vedic tradition, it's well known that the sound component of thought precedes the form of an object, and that is how form manifests, is from the pure tonality. And what we're finding is that these extraterrestrial civilizations really understand this, but in a way that has become expressed in technologies, that their technologies actually involve consciousness, sound, thought sound, what I call infra-ultrasound, where the tonality and thought sound on the level of the astral and etheric manifest objects. And this is why we have seen extraterrestrial objects in craft completely dematerialize and rematerialize effortlessly in any point in space-time where we're located, because they're able to phase back and forth between what some would call dimensions, but which is more correctly understood as this sort of holographically folded level of reality where consciousness and thought and tonality and sound and form and then electromagnetism and matter are all folded within each other. And that's what we go through over the course of this training week, is to train people in the understanding of this whole new cosmology of how consciousness and pure awareness and thought and mantras and remote viewing all tie into making contact with these extraterrestrial visitors, and how then the multiplicity of ways that the extraterrestrial visitors will then appear around us. Everyone, as I mentioned earlier before the break, think that, well, it's going to be like a Steven Spielberg movie and you walk over and kick the tires of the UFO. Well, sometimes. Usually, however, they don't need to do that. And why should they? Because their reality, as they travel through the universe at faster than the speed of light, is that they're phasing through these different energy forms. And I like to tell the story of early on when we were forming CSETI back in 1991, we took a trip to Belgium, where there had been a lot of these massive triangular ships seen in eastern Belgium near the German border. And we were in this little town near Henri-Chapelle, and we had met some of the gendarmes, some of the police, the Belgian police, who had been called to this event that took place. And what was fascinating is that they described this massive 800-foot diameter triangle right above the town square above a steeple. And they said that at a certain point, and it was making this humming, it had this sort of tonality to it. And then suddenly it collapsed into a sort of glowing plasma orb of light, sort of reddish orange, and then shot straight off into space, straight off into the clear sky. And that part of what happened had actually been sanitized out of the Air Force and the UFO organization's reports, because they thought that by putting it in there they would lose credibility. And I said, oh, no. This is the hallmark of it actually being something significant, because if it was just floating around like a piece of machinery, it could have more likely been what we call an alien reproduction vehicle, which are man-made UFOs that are made by Northrop and Lockheed, because we've been making copycat things that look like UFOs since the 40s and 50s in our classified human projects. So this is a very, very deep knowledge base that you have to reach to be able to begin to understand this, and to also to begin to have some sort of an operational understanding so that you can be out under the stars and make the discernment between, if you will, a faux UFO, meaning one that's man-made by Lockheed or Northrop, a real extraterrestrial vehicle, and all the other ways that they can appear.
It's always incredible. I mean, the things that we've seen, and I'm reminded of, you're talking about the subtle ways the ETs appear, and so often, and very many times at Shasta, we've seen, I remember the one year it was such a visible light being, that we could, everyone could really see this sort of glowing ghost-like figure walking around our circle, over the periphery of our circle, and kind of stopping by different people. And sometimes they're more subtle. They're kind of like little clusters of sparkles, and sometimes they're fog-like. But one particular time, very often we have the temperature changes where it's much, much warmer in our circle, and as we walk away from the circle, there's a distinct temperature change and it's much colder. But this one particular time, we were sitting in our circle, and you got up to go communicate with some ETs that were in a craft that was not that far from our circle, maybe 100 feet or less from the circle, over towards some trees.
Right.
And you said, that we should stay seated and you would call us when the time came. And so you walked out, and we couldn't see you anymore, even though you weren't that far away. You just disappeared to us. And so eventually you said, come here, and we followed the direction of your voice, although we couldn't see you, and there was a flash of green light, and we all thought that you had flashed your green laser so that we would be able to see where you were. And so we followed that, and we eventually found you. But what we didn't know is that you could see us perfectly clearly, and you had no idea that we couldn't see you, and you hadn't flashed your laser at all. It was all the ETs doing that.
Correct. And then my laser was actually put away in my coat pocket, and everyone saw this green light beside me. And although I personally did not see it. And the other interesting phenomenon about this is that earlier that day, we had gone up to this same site during the daytime, and we had seen this area where we sensed that there was a dematerialized extraterrestrial craft there. And we looked, and there was sort of like a heat wave distortion in the air, the shape of an ET craft, this
right.
sort of circular area. And I said, this is where there's a craft. And so that night, that's why I went to that area that night, because I saw that it had come back. And as I went into that area, I could see the beings that were there and the craft that was not quite fully materialized, but it was, I don't know how to explain it, almost like a plasma-like scintillating energy field that I was walking into. And as I went into that area, the people who were coming behind me, the rest of the group, just saw me disappear. But I didn't disappear. I was there, I thought, perfectly as usual. So we have these amazing sort of experiences happen where most people would think that, oh gosh, you can't make this stuff up. But it's just beautiful. And the reason I think we have this happen every single week that we do these expeditions and train people is that these extraterrestrial visitors have been coming here for a long time. And now humanity is at the stage where it's going from tribes to city-states to nations to, in fits and starts, trying to become a peaceful global civilization. And these visitors, these extraterrestrial civilizations, have been observing our evolution for a very long time, hundreds of thousands of years, maybe millions of years. And they're very excited about a group of people with a pure heart and with an understanding of the cosmology that involves consciousness, thought, energy, electromagnetism, matter, time, space, anti-gravity, all the information that we bring to bear on this, and putting it into an operational system where we go out there for the purpose of not just sort of objective observation of a phenomenon, but to actually make contact for the purpose of universal peace, for the coming together of humanity in a pure-hearted way with these visitors from other civilizations who have been waiting for us to reach this point in our evolution for so long, and who have been watching the development of humans for so long. And I think this is why when the group enters into that understanding, there is such an affirmation and confirmation through all these experiences we have. On the other hand, if there are people in the group who are there because they just want to kind of like go to Disney World and see a UFO, they really usually don't show up until those people fall asleep or go home or something, because they really don't want to interact with mere curiosity seekers. They're wanting to interact with people who really understand the deep spiritual dimension of what we're doing and the wonderful time that we're trying to co-create together, and that is this time of universal peace, where we go from this time of fractured human warfare and division to a time of world peace, but beyond world peace, universal peace, where Earth takes her place along with the other civilizations throughout the cosmos as we evolve into a truly universal society. And I think that that's why they're so excited about making contact with a group of people. There are many individuals by themselves who've had various contact experiences, but it's an order of magnitude greater when a group of people do this with this higher purpose. It creates a totally new dynamic. And this is what they've been waiting for. I know that this is what they have been waiting for, and that's why when we go out and make this effort and the group gets in this state of awareness, that there's such a immediate confirmation from them as we do this work.
And, over about the past year, you've started doing pujas out in the field at our various locations. And last year at Mount Shasta, we did have a situation where there was some fear in the group. And after you did the puja, it was so amazing how the whole atmosphere of the training changed. That's
right. And what's interesting is that the reason I did it where we did it last year is that a couple of years ago we were up in this area up on Mount Shasta called Sand Flats, and we were there was a ET craft that was between us and the top of Mount Shasta that we were signaling to and that everybody was seeing, and we had moved up onto this embankment just so we could get a little better view and get clear of a tree line that was in front of us. And we were there on the side of this little hill, and we were signaling and communicating with this craft that was floating from the Mount Shasta area about two-thirds of the way up Mount Shasta, and it was coming towards us, and it was this lit object. And at that point, someone on the team saw a very high-flying, he thought it was a 747, that came in from, I believe, the west or southwest. And suddenly there was this massive electromagnetic weapon that was released from that object, from the craft, not the ET craft, but from this jet, and was fired towards Mount Shasta and towards us. And what we heard, I mean, this was a crystal clear night, would be as if you can imagine the most powerful lightning bolt you've ever heard crashing, and it came and it crashed into the trees in front of us, ripping through the forest and then plowing into the earth like that, way into the earth, where it literally shook the earth. And this went on for many seconds. This was like, a split-second thing. This went in for like 10 or 15 seconds. And it was an attempt, I believe, using these sort of Star Wars weapon systems that some of these misguided classified projects have developed that are electromagnetic weapons, to stop the contact event from progressing any further. Now, the ET craft wasn't hurt. We weren't hurt. But what it did is that it showed us how far they're willing to go to try to stop peaceful contact. But it didn't stop it because we continued to have contact the rest of that week. Now, what's interesting, though, is that area had somehow had something in the Akashic record there, something in the fabric of space-time had gotten disrupted. And we were never really able to go back to that exact site and do this work over the subsequent couple of years. And this past year, in 2007, that's why we went up there and we did this cleansing puja. And we brought in this pure, unbounded consciousness and love into that area. And we found that at that point, it erased and cleared the air, as it were, from that site. And then we continued to be able to do field work there. And at one point, several people actually heard the event in reverse, a sort of a soft tone of it, as if the event was unwinding out of the space-time that was there.
I totally heard that, and I knew what it was too.
It was amazing. This work is so fascinating, and it's so much not what most people expect. Because most people expect, we're going to go out on a UFO sky watch and we'll stand around and, just look at the sky. And it's highly interactive and so dynamic and so exciting. And what people realize when they finally begin to do this is that this is for real. This is where humans are making direct contact with these visitors on a number of levels, both in the physical, but also in consciousness and in heart. And I think that what people realize is that added into that is this highly dysfunctional covert interest that doesn't want that to go forward because they're very addicted to the military corporate complex being able to scare people about the ET presence and eventually justify a sort of a war in outer space, this sort of end of the world Armageddon scenario, which is why almost all of the UFO subculture is just inundated with disinformation that scares the heck out of the general public about these visitors and why they're here. And it's completely been concocted because they want the public to be afraid. And it's just like after 9/11, the kind of fear that can be engendered in society by the unknown or a threat that's from the unknown can cause these people to seize more and more centralized power. So, the old saying, fear is the mind killer. It's also the spirit killer. And I tell people there's really nothing to be afraid of. And when we go out, we have never had anything negative happen to anyone, even though we've had very intimate and close contact. I mean, a year or two ago, we had a group up in Joshua Tree, and there were four, during the height of the meditation, 4 extraterrestrial physical beings that appeared right outside the circle, maybe 5 or 10 feet outside the circle, and were there standing. And people just looked and saw them there. And people think, this is, you got to be kidding. I said, no, this sort of thing happens, but it's in that very deep state. And what we're aware of is that at the same time, we have some of these classified human projects that are very heavily invested in the fear scenario, not wanting us to get the truth out. They don't want people to know that you can actually make contact. And it isn't difficult. You have to understand a few principles, which is why we train people to do this. And you need a limited amount of technological knowledge. And the main thing you need is a pure heart and an open mind and a willingness to practice the protocols. And we have found that when people have left these training expeditions and gone home and done some of this work, or even before they come, they have amazing contact experiences that they never thought were possible. And our goal is that in every community that there be a CSETI diplomatic contact team that could be the advanced team to educate the public, but also to be an interface between the local society and these extraterrestrial visitors for peaceful contact. Because, if we sit around and wait forever for the United Nations or the European governments or the U.S. government or some other government to do this in a proper way, we may run out of time. And my feeling about it is that if the people will lead, the leaders will follow. And this is what we're finding. This is why we have been approached in the last year or two by the people at the highest level of a major G7 country that want CSETI to help them set up these contact protocols for their government and for their head of state. We're not talking low-level people in their foreign ministry. We're talking at the level of the head of state. And the reason that's happening is that it's, if you go to what Rupert Sheldrake has talked about in morphogenic fields, where when enough people begin to do something, it creates a sort of positive field reaction through consciousness and non-locality that then potentiates it happening more. And so as more of us learn the truth about this and begin to practice universal peace, both in consciousness meditation but also out under the stars together as a functional team, it creates up a dynamic that is now ricocheting around some of the real corridors of power in Europe and at the United Nations and elsewhere.
I've never experienced anything but absolute delight and amazement, and very, very often it's really touching the ETs convey an emotion to us, and it's often very loving.
Oh, yes. I mean, I think that that's the other thing is that everyone always worries that, oh, gosh, will it be scary? Will it be this? I said the only thing that's been scary are the humans that sometimes do crazy things, like firing this electromagnetic weapon that crashed into the forest in front of us. But I think that the ETs, everything is just such a state of beauty, and it's not at all what you see in the UFO videos and documentaries and on television and in the movies, because what I have found is that so much of that is channeled to those media by people who have an interest or are on the payroll of some classified project that wants people to be terrified. And I think that what we have to decide is to go out there and find out what the truth is for ourselves, because all of us are conscious, all of us are children of planet Earth, and all of us are capable of learning how to center, go into this unbounded state of consciousness using the meditations, then remote view these ET beings and craft, wherever they are, whether they're in a volcano or out in space or wherever they are, and invite them to come and contact us within this framework of universal peace and in that deep commitment to peace. And I think that when that happens and when people understand how to do that, they're not disappointed. I mean, it's just one of these things where they're really just waiting for people to awaken to the possibility.
It's just a profound and wonderful experience to communicate with these beings, and we've been having increasingly more experiences with the God consciousness beings.
Yes, and see, this is the other part of this, is that it's not as if there's all this separateness. We view things in the West in a very sort of linear and separate way. And what we're seeing with this is that the state of the unbounded being within each of us, the existence of higher celestial beings, the existence of advanced extraterrestrial civilizations, that this is all part of a dynamic, and we find that all of that happens all at once on these sites, and that many of the civilizations that we've come into contact with are ones that are, I think, several 100,000 to perhaps a few million years more developed and evolved than human civilization is today. And all the beings who are in those civilizations are in a state of pure God consciousness, in a state of true high enlightenment. And yes, they will materialize in a spacecraft, but they will also dematerialize, or they will be there simply as a point of scintillating conscious light. And this happened at Mount Shasta. We were out one evening a couple of years ago. I forget which year it was.
2006, I think. Yes,
it was 2006, about 2 years ago. And during this same week that we'll be there this year, August 31st to September 6th, and we saw first one of these brilliant, and when I say light, it isn't a light like you normally think of. It was like it was physically visible with both the night scope binoculars and the naked eye, but it was a brilliant diamond white object, but it was also conscious. So it was a craft, and at the same time it was conscious, and within it was the consciousness of these God-conscious, very advanced, enlightened extraterrestrial beings that were in it. And it was emerging from Mount Shasta. First there was one, then there were 2 or 3. Eventually we saw 8 of them. I mean, it was astonishing. And Trudy Geiger, who's a senior member of our contact team, told me that, she was so speechless for the first hour or 2 after this, because the level of consciousness and intelligence and brilliance emanating from what we saw was something you really just can't put into words. Even though you were seeing it physically and you were experiencing it, it was something that was beyond the physical and even beyond the normal mental thought level. It was very profound. And these are the kinds of things that are continuing to happen and are actually growing. I think you're quite right. Each time we go out.
Right. It never ends. It's just astonishing and wonderful every single time. I've learned so much from these experiences.
Well, this is sort of the experience that we want to leave people with the idea of, and that is that everyone has within them the ability to be in touch with this unbounded aspect of consciousness, and then to manifest whatever it is they wish to manifest. And we're saying that as we gather together on these expeditions, that we're manifesting this time of universal peace and this time of the coming together of peoples throughout the cosmos. And many people will find that if they step a little bit in that direction, that the doors just fly wide open for them. And that's why we invite people to join us. And we're going to, as I said, be up there on Mount Shasta, and then again from the 31st of August till April 6th. But we're also going to do this again here in Charlottesville, Virginia in October. And then in November, we'll be back up at the Joshua Tree site that we have, where we actually had a massive ET craft come down and go into the earth, and they showed us basically where an underground ET area is located there in the national park. And so we invite people to join us on these expeditions. It's a wonderful experience, but it also is creating the time of universal peace. It's not just that we're doing a training or an expedition. We're actually manifesting this time. We're having it flow through us, and it is creating this time of universal peace by our actions. Well, I would like to thank you, Linda, for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. It was wonderful.
Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, and Linda Willitts has been here with me, and this is brought to you by the World Puja Network, and I really want to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for letting us share these experiences and information with everyone. And if you want more information, you can go to CSETI.org or disclosureproject.org. And I hope to see some of you on one of these expeditions under the stars in the near future. Take care, and God bless all of you.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.